Hello, fellow readers. Welcome to the channel where the star is the book. And today I would like to present to you a masterpiece, especially if you're into history. Please, masterpiece, come here, get to meet our fellow readers. Don't be shy. Arthur Koestler, Le Zéro et l'Infini. The English version for this, the English title for this is Darkness at Noon. So, Darkness at Noon, written in 1940 by the Hungarian-born Arthur Koestler. Koestler was inspired into writing this book after losing several of his friends in the Moscow trials, those sham trials set in Moscow throughout the 1930s, where the most homicidal shoemaker in history, Joseph Stalin, got rid of his real, but mostly imaginary opposition. He was also inspired into writing this book because he had some unfortunate experiences as a POW in the Spanish Civil War. The book at the time of publication was a major success in France and is believed to have swayed the French nation away from Marxism Leninism. The same thing happened several decades later throughout the rest of the world with the publication of The Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn. On a side note, one of the things that first drew me into this book was first my love of history, but secondly my perennial fascination with the operative mode of the human brain under a dictatorship, the way the human brain weighs, views, and contemplates things in an authoritarian context. What is the truest and oldest political and ethical axiom of all time? The idea that the end justifies the means, that power justifies itself. I would argue that dictatorships deal with this conundrum far worse than democracies, and to me that's their original their original sin, their major philosophical and existential flaw. There's certainly not a single end to justify all the means, since every person is in itself a different end. But the thing is much more peacefully dealt with in the context of a democracy and its twin brother capitalism, since they allow for the selfish expression of every distinctive end, much more in accordance, indeed, with our own selfish nature. Adam Smith described this as the invisible hand behind a society in his seminal book, The Wealth of Nations. But I would argue that it's the exact opposite in dictatorships, with all their propaganda about a pseudo-new man, a pseudo-new woman, and a pseudo-new uncorrupted nature. The invisible hand behind a dictatorship is another primordial instinct of man, fear. And since nobody admits openly, freely, and willingly to being afraid, even in a dictatorship, the whole thing is disguised as idealism or the corruption of idealism. The end result is still always the same. Every regime disappoints its losers, but dictatorships smother the disappointment, and nobody would argue that it's much more therapeutic to cry out loud our disappointment than it is to asphyxiate it. But I digress, so let's get back to the book. The main character of the book is one Rubachov. Rubachov is a first-generation Marxist born in the old Tsarist world, highly doctrinated and intelligent, a true believer, and at core a decent human being. Throughout his life, he helped spread Marxist ideas at a great personal peril, and acted as a sort of ideological enforcer, correcting in the name of the party small and big deviations. The book starts with Rubachov's imprisonment and interrogation under a pretense accusation, as was most of the cases with the Moscow trials. His most feared interrogator turns out to be one named Gladkin. Gladkin is an amoral and crass individual, a proponent of torture, which he will later indeed use against Rubachov himself. Rubachov abhors the idea of torture. So Gletkin embodies the degeneration of the first Marxist ideals, is the new breed of apparatchik, the happy trigger behind each one of the party's new costly demands. Rubachov even refers to Gletkin as a Neanderthal, a man who was born with no umbilical cord, since he was already born in a Marxist society. So, the book operates a lot with these sort of contrasting mirrors. One of the most interesting contrasting mirror is the one that opposes Rubachov to inmate number 402. Number 402 is a white officer, a member of the Tsarist army, and they communicate through tapping on the wall, a sort of Morse code. As you can imagine, they start by despising and taunting one another, but by the end of the novel, they cross the troubled waters of ideology over the bridge of human pity and decency, and they sort of become friends. But the most striking mirror in the book is the one that opposes Rubachov to his troubled conscience. Sensing the end, he is reunited with his high, which he finally calls his grammatic fiction. The whole thing might sound a little far-fetched, but trust me, it works fine in the book. So up until that point, like the party, Rubachov, and this is a direct quote from the book, denied the existence of private property, especially inside people's minds. So now that the tables are turned and the shoe is finally on the other foot, Rubachov starts reminiscing episodes of his life. He starts recollecting people whose small deviations from the doctrine he was sent to correct, and thus knowingly contributing to their untimely demise. The sacrificial logic demanded by the party isn't enough to persuade Rubachov of the usefulness of his own sacrifice or any other sacrifice for that matter, because, and this is a great sentence in page 306, in death, metaphysics becomes real. So Rubachov is left weighing the costly effects of his life's work and all of his reasonings. But most dramatically, even in the end, Rubachov can't fully repudiate the Marxist system, and he is left believing that his capitulation is one last honorable service he will render the revolution. History showed what happened to those people who volunteered themselves for sacrifice in behalf of the revolution. And please, don't cry your outrage for me telling you that Rubachov dies in the end. It's a book inspired by the Moscow trials. If you've followed the video so far, you surely could not believe that he was gonna make it. So, Koestler, to me, writes the worst possible epitaph for a life, the worst possible epitaph for any life. Rubachov dies without the comfort of any certainty. Let me just leave you with one eerie final quote from the book about the warped mind of an autocrat, since that topic is on the agenda these days. Listen to this, page 246. Rubachov is talking about Joseph Stalin. He refers to Stalin as number one. So, page 246. Number one was not an accidental phenomenon. He was the embodiment of a certain human feature. That is, the absolute belief in the infallibility of his own convictions, where he drew the necessary strength to his absolute lack of scruples. So that's a wrap. Hope you kind folks enjoy. Hope to see you again for the next review. And until then, please read on. Reading is still our best shot at trying to be above average. See ya.